Hello, I am Greg Livingston, aka Golem, and I am here with the developer of Miracle Mia. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Boose, and I am the developer of Miracle Mia and founder of Shamir Studios.
Alright, and Miracle Mia is kind of a weird game about using the power of tennis. um, so, actually, building off that, I wanted to ask in Miracle Mia, you return enemy attacks using a tennis racket.
Mhm.
They'll shoot at you, and it'll be like a bullet like any 2D shooter, but instead of dodging it, you want to stand in its path so that you can intercept it and return it to the enemy. And the main character does this with a tennis racket. So I wanted to ask, to what extent did tennis inspire the gameplay?
It actually all started as a game jam game. It's not a one-to-one straight translation to the rules of tennis, but rather I wanted to capture the feeling of perfectly parrying a shot that the enemy provided. Like that's the main feeling that goes around for the whole game.
Okay. It's definitely different from tennis in that the balls are a lot bigger. The size is easier to hit. And also in tennis, usually people are trying to throw balls away from you. But also in Miracle Mia, I'll notice, if I swing too early or too late, it's easy to whiff and then miss the ball. And so it does have a satisfying sense of returning the projectile like you get in tennis.
hmm
I also noticed that Mia performs different swing animations based on where you aim. So, like, if you aim downward, then Mia swings the racket over her head. So, I was wondering watching that, I couldn't tell if her swing's collision detection changed based on what kind of animation she was in.
Sort of. Like the swings directly mostly influence the direction of where the ball is going towards. Like enemy shoots a ball straight at you, you swing up, the ball will go up and stuff. And mostly if the ball hits within her animation collision range, that the ball will be influenced that way. However, when she does try to attack an enemy directly, like if her glider does overlap with the enemy, then it will directly hit and stuff.
Okay. So, just to make sure I understand, the collision of the swing generally matches the animation pretty closely.
Pretty closely, like 1 to 1. The range of her swings are actually pretty similar to each other. The only difference is basically the upswing and downswing has like a slight overhead over her head
Okay.
or under her feet.
Yeah.
But usually, in most cases, like the orb moves so fast, when you begin the string, the orb will be in the vicinity of where it will be hit, and as a result, they will register the attack.
Yeah, I haven't found that it matters which animation, but that was like a subtle touch that I was wondering about.
Yeah, it makes more sense. Like I want to aim up, then Mia should aim up and stuff,
Yeah,
or she should be shown to be aiming up.
yeah. I also had some questions about the enemy design in Miracle Mia. There's a few key ways in which they're different from each other. So,
hmm
some enemies shoot different kinds of projectiles, like there's the green muck that they can shoot.
Yeah, those frog. Yeah.
Yeah. Some guard themselves, and
hmm
others will, like, bounce. And aside from the boss, they all just have one hit point. So, first off, I was wondering, are there any key variations that I haven't listed?
Yeah, there are. Later levels introduce more variation of the enemy, like ones that move around while guarding, others that can shoot at a much more faster rate, along with a new enemy that can go underground and be invulnerable for most of your attacks and will pop up right under you and stuff.
Okay, so there's a lot of variation you've milked out of this concept.
Yeah, like 9 levels later, like you get ones that zoom around throwing explosives, others that are literally fling themselves at you and you can't whack them off and stuff. And then like those frog guys come back, but you start spinning out poisoning up certain points on the map, so you're more limited in where you need to go and stuff.
Huh.
So it does get a lot more crazy, and that's was one of the main features that I really liked about the game.
How did you decide on the scope of the enemy variety?
Mostly because I like making a lot of enemies, but if we're going back to the very early days of Miracle Mio, like when I first made that Game Jam game, I made like 11 types of enemies. and basically trying to experiment how they'll interplay with the parry system and stuff.
Okay. So from that first experimental phase, did you ever have any enemies that you had to take out because they didn't work as well as the others?
Yeah, first ones I took out were more puzzle based ones. Like originally, the defenders were more of a puzzle based enemy, similar to like I guess in Ocarina of Time, the Poe ghost that you have to pick which one is the real one or something. Like during that phase, they mostly came in fours, and one of them opened their eyes and shoot while the arrows kept them closed. You have to knock them bad. But I guess basically it's sort of like it was in conflict of how I wanted the pace of the game to go, so they were reinterpreted to the more defender type enemies. Other ones was that didn't make it in late in the game was a phantom type enemy where he would become intangible for a little while, where Mia won't be able to hit them, and when she does hit them, he'll spawn a little ghost, a small ghost that will pop out. That you have to kill that one too, otherwise he'll resurrect himself. And another one was like an enemy that could rebound attacks just like Mia. However, when I played around with it, it was pretty much similar to how the defender enemies behave. Like, if you deflect a orb at them while they're defending, it'll bounce right back at them. And eventually, most of these abilities were then transferred into like boss abilities. Like the villain from the beginning of the demo will come back, and eventually there's a moment where you do play a little game of tennis with her, where she knocks back and forth. So a little bit similar to how like the Gander fight in Legend of Zelda, actually.
Yeah, yeah. So the rebounder enemy was a little redundant with Mia, and still it was able to be reincorporated as a boss.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious about the phantom enemy you described. What was your reason for taking that out?
Mostly, I think it's mostly the design of the character. Like, this is sort of like me working with the story a little bit, and like the design of those guys were radically different compared to the other Geos, which are the enemies and stuff. So I was originally deciding to move them around the level, but I eventually incorporated their power into a boss type as well, similar to like the rebounder enemy and stuff. I'm still in development of the game, so like they may or may not be back into the game, but there was a little bit more fine tuned that needed to go, but I didn't remove them due to gameplay, more so as an aesthetic or a story reason. Like
They didn't fit the world of the game.
in a way, or rather, didn't fit the moment in where they would be introduced in the game.
Okay. Part of Miracle Mia is that it's a little bit like a brawler, right? Where sometimes you're locked in an arena.
Yeah, like Streets of Rage type. Like there are moments in the game where you basically are stuck in an arena, or actually a little bit more like the Devil May Cry. Actually, like moments where in Devil May Cry 4, like you enter a room and basically like the red gate shows up and then your enemies are spawned in and stuff.
Right.
Only in this case, it goes a little more smaller since basically the screen's so small, and the enemies are all projectile based.
So she'll be stuck in this space, and enemies are shooting at her from all different directions. But when I describe it verbally, it sounds really hectic. But in gameplay, I find that I usually don't have much trouble with the game. So I was wondering, did you need to do anything special to pace the game appropriately so that you didn't overwhelm the player?
That's one of the first comments that actually came up in the early development of Miracle Man. Actually, like one of my friends pointed out, like basically like there's so much things going on, but I was able to keep track, and I guess they mostly compliment that to like the designs of the characters. Like the enemy's color scheme pop out vividly against the background, so you always have an idea of where they would be relative to your position. And I did add a few tidbits into the game design. Like the game does keep tabs on like how you're behaving in the game, like, and also where your position is based off of the enemies. Like, and one example is like early when I was playing around with Miracle Mia, like a kid was just sitting in the corner spamming the attack button, and at that time enemies just shoot at them, and then he was able to just create like a shield that protected him for the whole round, killing all the challenge. Eventually, I added a stamina system that basically like that will exhaust me and preventing her from attacking for a little bit. But a lot of my friends were a little bit annoyed at this mechanic because like it basically held the pace. I eventually got the idea just to make the enemies more smarter. So like if there are moments where you just spamming that attacks in your corner, the enemies will just won't do anything. They'll just stare at you for like just stare at you with an odd look on the face. And eventually you have to go up to fight them, or a melee focused enemy will come in and smash you and stuff. So there are factors that keeps them from just spawning things randomly. And I try to also make sure like only like maybe 5 or 6 enemies can show up on screen, but like only 2 or 3 of them will shoot at you, so giving you an option of what you need to do and where you need to deflect and stuff.
So you'll have several enemies on screen at once, but somehow on the back end they're coordinated enough so that only 2 of them will be shooting you at a time.
Yeah, and eventually the enemies that are basically more melee focused or like have alternate abilities will show up that aren't so bullet spammy and stuff. Not to say that there aren't any bullet spammy enemies in the game. Those are most of them are really related to the bosses. But like I would say even the structure of the level, like the enemies are basically a good way of leading you up to that boss. Like they're meant to prepare you for the bullet hell bonanza or something like that. Or just basically like running away from a monster while they're constantly under fire, but still be able to like know the position and know how to take them out.
Okay. There was a lot in that. You've put a lot of thought into this.
Yeah. Like, that is basically the main core of it. Like, when coming up with the design of Miracle Mia, this is sort of came out from playtesting, but sort of like keeping the whole parry system there, but not be so constrained to waiting around just whacking it back. Other elements like the type of enemy and the environment of where you fight, like when you go into an arena, like not all the arenas are the same. Like in the demo, like there's one arena where the floor is gone and you have to use a special ability which allows you to jump between hook to hook and stuff. So Mia is basically suspended in air, knocking enemies back, and then jumping to another hook, and just basically going dodging around all around the place and stuff.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So in general about the gameplay pacing, I find that I rarely move during an enemy encounter.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is because enemies shoot at my position, and I want to engage with the parry system, so I stay in the one place to knock it back. And I find that, for instance, if I try to use the special attack, and then I miss, then I've lost an opportunity that I could have had just standing my ground. And also, there are the hooks that you mentioned, where Mia is stuck in place, and she can't get off them unless she teleports or jumps. So I feel like my performance increases if I just have Mia sit put in one place. Does that match your idea of how the game plays?
It actually matches the very early conception of Miracle Mia. Back in the day, like Miracle Mia was actually really close to like a standard beat 'em up game where she only could move left and right, and she couldn't even really jump around at that point. That was mostly like incentivizing the whole like parry system, like basically understanding the timing of the enemy's shots and basically knocking it back over. But later on, that mentality got pretty stale, so like I started introducing other factors like the teleport hooks that get you to jump from position to position really, really fast. Like you still stay still, but like if they're shooting at you on your backside, then you can either face them back or like teleport away and stuff. And later in the level, like as the level goes on, more enemies are introduced that basically try to break you away from that whole standstill mentality. Like those underground enemies that I mentioned earlier will actually stay underground, try to go under you and basically uppercut you in some way. So you have to basically keep on walking around, like just slightly moving yourself to another position in order to, and waiting for them to pop out and then shoot at you again so you can deflect it. And most of the bosses in the end does incentivize you moving around. Like the final boss in the demo prevents you from staying on the ground entirely. You can fight him on the ground if he shoot at you, but if you get too close, his attack will basically like chomp you off. So you're incentivized to actually use the hook to basically nullify that attack, where he'll try to shoot you down or try to get you back on the ground with this sticky gunk, and where you have to teleport around. Like Mia's abilities from later on that she gets actually incentivize travel. The hookshot ability is the obvious one, like you can basically teleport to move your position from their area quickly, and when the enemy starts shooting bullets really fast, you may not have enough time to actually deflect it, so you have to teleport around. And then you're also given a short-term dash and a small hover when I eventually take the floor away from you in later levels and stuff.
Okay, so it sounds like Mia's movement gets developed a good deal more than what we see in the demo.
Yeah, like the demo, like the first early levels really want you to get comfortable with the whole parry system, as it is a very different way of fighting enemies and stuff. And I try to find a balance to make sure like Mia's potential movement speed and her way traversal doesn't overshadow the parry mechanic. Otherwise, she'll be like another action game with a melee focus. So like moments where I take away the floor from you and then you have to use the hooks are moments where you actually need to use the strictly using the parry system. But I do allow the player to approach it in different ways. Like Nia has her sister Nia with her, which acts as more of a support character, where you are given a short stun ability, which you can shoot at the enemies to basically stun them, and then you can either whack them with your racket or shoot them again to actually beat them up, or use one of the special abilities, the twin swing or the super swing, I would call, which it's a long range attack and can affect enemies, but it's a bit more hard to control, but can also take out stronger enemies, like the defenders can go down in one hit, unlike her normal melee attack. All that stuff was sort of like given like later in the development, where like some players wanted to be a little more aggressive and stuff. Like they didn't wrap their head fully around the parry mechanic at the moment, but still wanted to continue the game. So like I gave them a different alternative of how they can play it, but also retain the parry system.
That sounds like it would be a tricky balance, but when I was introduced to that twin swing ability where you could just melee attack any enemy you wanted, I figured this probably breaks the game wide open because you wouldn't have to deflect anything. You could just walk around hitting stuff. But
Yeah.
then I think the way the stamina is balanced and the way
Hmm.
that you get locked into that animation actually makes that pretty tricky to use, and it's
Yeah.
kind of offset with the parry as like an alternative option, but you got to decide, is it really worth it?
Yeah, like it is definitely meant for high level play or like depending on your play style. Like I got people who play the game who basically just use the parry system, but some of them who they feel more in line with the twin system. So like it is depending on the player's expectation of the game. Eventually, like I was thinking, as for like a difficult mode where you do lose in the end, and you just stick with the parry system where speed or movement harder. But like those are like alternate modes that I may put in and stuff. But there is like a fine balance. That twin swing is definitely powerful, but it is tied to the stamina, and you do lose some control compared to the parry system, where it's much more faster, it's quicker to go. It just all revolves around your timing, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are other abilities that you are given within the game. Those abilities are used to basically get past like specific obstacles, but eventually they just become a part of your arsenal. Like similar to like the twin swing, you get a dash ability that basically dashes through the enemies. That's also tied to the stamina system. An AOE attack that stuns all the enemies but uses up another resource, and so on and so forth. I try to make sure that they weren't just one-off powers, but like stuff that's in your arsenal to up to your decision of how you want to use them to fight against the geos and stuff.
I guess you could imagine a game that feels more like a puzzle where each ability only works on one enemy and you kind of have to know what to use in the moment. But the way you've designed Miracle Mia is more, you have this vast array of abilities and they all impact enemies equally, and it's
Hmm.
sort of up to your choosing, given the
Yeah,
context, which of these abilities is going to help me the most.
yeah, like that's how I really prefer how weapons and options are used in games. I always get annoyed when I'm basically forced to use this one ability for this one type of enemy, but I always like enjoyed basically like mixing up the combat in different ways and stuff. Like you give me all these toys, I want to basically use these toys, but also like pace them. Like I don't want to just use the bat. I also want to use the tennis racket or the golf ball or something else. Like and I believe it's the design job to make sure like all of those are fun to use, but leave it up to the player to decide which is their main go-to and stuff.
That you provide the option to the player, but it might be
Yeah,
dependent on their play style, how
yeah,
they use it.
yeah, and to their own self-discovery. Like some people were able to use specific strategies in Miracle Me that other players haven't used it. Like one of them was in when finding the boss. figured out that the sticky shots can stun enemies, and then using the Nia shots on the sticky shot to basically hurt the enemies, while others just use the twin shot and time it precisely when the boss opened his eyes, or they just tough it out and just basically just ran up and whack him over the time. Well, they died most of the time like that, but yeah, like I rather leave that to the player and like have them discover it for themselves.
Yeah, I was definitely one of the people that used the green shot to stun the boss and then hit him with one of the secondary shots.
Yeah, I try to encourage like you can basically solve the solution in multiple different ways, and basically make sure like they're all pretty satisfying to do and stuff. Do something like give the game like a little more depth than what you normally would expect from this game, this type of game and stuff.
Yeah. So that was all I had on my mind. It sounds like there weren't any topics that you wanted to cover aside from those.
And not at the moment. Like the game is still currently in development, though I'm trying to home in on November release. I guess other small bits are like sort of like how I was experimenting with the narrative. I try to have the narrative in the game basically like play out alongside with the gameplay. Like there are moments in the game where it does stop you to give you some exposition, but for the most part, like characters chat with each other, like with small little bubbles popping up and stuff. It's mostly there just to give like the game a little more personality, a little more depth, because like it's something I actually kind of enjoy, like the audio logs in a Bioshock or a Prey and stuff, and just sort of like having some extra tidbits that basically makes the world a little more alive, a little bit more alive and stuff.
Yeah. I guess if I think back through other action games I played, in God of War, you might kill some guys and then do a block pushing puzzle or something like that. And
Yeah.
Miracle Mia, for its pacing, has some pretty mild platforming and also those dialogue sequences.
Yeah. They're mostly there as to basically give the late game a little more flavor and also break up the pacing from constantly fighting, simple game design turns and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So this last question is something I try to ask everybody. When it comes to video games, which is the most important to you? The intention of the designer, the experience of the player, or the game itself?
Funny that's actually a good way of describing the method of how I make games. I usually start out with playing with a brand new idea or mechanic I haven't seen in games before, and just play around with it, getting to a good spot, and then eventually when I showed it to people for playtesting, I try to find a way to basically make sure that the experience that they're playing is enjoyable. So it's sort of like a balance of both. Like I want to keep the thing that make my games unique, but I also want the player to be able to play it and not play to the best of their ability, and hopefully have a good experience with it, and also like showing them something new.
The way you describe it sounds like you come upon an experience, a novel experience that you enjoy, and then you test with others to make sure that you can convey that experience to others.
Yeah,
Okay.
I want to make sure it sticks out, but I also want to make sure like the game is playable. Like to me, like a game isn't a game until you have people playing it and stuff. So I want to basically make that idea that it's definitely me, but also like make sure like people are able to play it themselves. That's actually how a lot of my games started. Like I usually just pick a random idea or quote from a game jam and eventually like make something out of it, and eventually getting people to play it, and then I basically like reiterate and basically make sure it's enjoyable, but also keep to my vision.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, your game development studio, I guess you would call it,
Shame
is...
yeah.
Yep.
It's me, but I do have like friends and contractors who basically help me out. Like the music for Miracle Me was done by a friend I met in Magfest. Called her studio is called Sonic Blasters,
Oh,
and she actually introduced me to like a few sound designers actually who are doing the sounds for Miracle Mia. But like the animation, the drawing, the game design, the programming, that's all me. Basically, I want to cover like the aspects of games that are also very important, but also like that are not in my wheelhouse per se, like music and sound.
right.
I actually learned how to do all this stuff, but basically doing that all at once, like But yeah, like the animation and the game design, like those are stuff that I really shine at.
So we can find your other stuff at shademare.com.
Yep, all my old games should be there, and Miracle Mia also has a Steam page, and it will be ready by November of this year, hopefully, maybe, yes.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.